All right, listener, ready for another deep dive? Today we're gonna tackle Japanese rocketry, and well, it's a bit of a tough story to tell. Space One, this private company over in Japan, they were shooting for the stars, literally, with their Kairos 2 rocket. But unfortunately, this ended up being their second failed launch attempt just this year. So we've got a bunch of articles here to dig into from space.com and Space News, and we've even got some extra little snippets from Reuters and Wikipedia too. So what's the big deal, right? Just another company trying to get to orbit and failing. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely a bit of a nail biter, and it really, I think it highlights how insanely difficult spaceflight is.
Mhm.
And even those big names out there, the ones with decades of experience, they've all had their fair share of mishaps.
Right, and so let's break this down for our listener. So Space One launches this Kairos 2 rocket on December 17th from their spaceport Kai. And their goal was to be the first private company in Japan to get a satellite into orbit. Pretty ambitious, right? But just a few minutes after liftoff, things went really, really wrong.
Yeah, it started tumbling out of control only about 3 minutes in. Imagine that watching your satellite, your dreams literally spiraling downwards. They had to terminate the flight at about 62 miles up, way short of orbit, obviously.
And, this wasn't their first try at this. Didn't they have an almost identical failure back in March?
You've got a good memory there. That first one was even quicker. I mean, basically the rocket exploded just seconds after liftoff. This time Space One mentioned issues with nozzle control and the rocket's trajectory. But it really seems like they're having problems with that first stage engine or maybe the control system.
Now, I know a lot of our listeners out there, they're pretty tech savvy. So let's get a little more into the weeds here. What kind of engine are we even talking about here? Is this similar to what, say, SpaceX uses?
That's a great question, and it's a fascinating difference. Space One and JAXA, Japan Space Agency, they've been relying on these solid fuel rockets, especially for these smaller launches. They're simpler to design compared to those liquid-fueled engines that SpaceX uses. But they can be a lot harder to control. Think of it like trying to steer a firework once you've already lit it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great analogy. So it sounds like there were some really fundamental differences here in the technology being used. Would it be fair to say then that Japan is facing a pretty uphill battle trying to catch up in this commercial space race?
Well, there's no denying SpaceX's success, especially with the reusable rockets and the sheer number of launches they do. But it's also important to remember that they're playing in a totally different league. SpaceX is focused on those heavier payloads and missions to the International Space Station, while Japan, at least for the moment, is really concentrating on this growing market for small satellite launches.
So different part of the market, but still, these repeated failures got to be a blow, not just for Space One, but for Japan's space ambitions in general. And, we can't forget that this launch was carrying satellites for other companies and organizations. What happens to them now?
It's a tough break for everyone involved. You've got these satellite owners, including a company all the way from Taiwan, and even a group of Japanese high school students. They've all invested time and resources hoping to get their projects up into space, and now they have to start over. Plus, each failure like this chips away at Japan's credibility in this increasingly competitive commercial space sector. They're up against some heavy hitters like SpaceX and Rocket Lab.
It's almost like a domino effect, isn't it? One setback leads to another.
Yeah, it really shows you how interconnected this industry is. These failures send ripples through the whole space community. It affects not just the companies involved, but investors, researchers, even future aspirations for space exploration are impacted. And what's really interesting is that this isn't the only Japanese rocket that's facing some challenges. Have you heard about the Epsilon S?
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. This one's developed by JAXA, right?
Exactly. It's a similar story to the Kairos small launch vehicle designed for smaller satellites, and it's had some very public setbacks. They had an engine explosion during a test just last month, and there was another one back in July of 2023. It's starting to raise some serious questions about what's going on with rocket development over in Japan, both for private companies and for the government.
Okay, listener, get ready because this is where it gets really interesting. We've got two different Japanese rockets, both aimed at the same market, both experiencing similar problems.
Coincidence.
Or is there something bigger going on here? We'll dig into that right after this.
Two engine explosions during testing, that's definitely concerning, makes you wonder if there's something else going on. Is it like a design flaw, a manufacturing problem, or even something with their quality control? It's going to take a lot of digging to figure out what's really going on there.
Right, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Every layer you peel back, you find something new, but it's a slow and tedious process. And while they're trying to figure out what went wrong, everyone else is moving forward. We talked about SpaceX earlier, and it seems like they're operating on a totally different level. What's the secret to their success?
Well, one key ingredient is something called vertical integration. Basically, they have all the pieces of the puzzle under one roof: design, manufacturing, testing, even the launches themselves. SpaceX controls pretty much every aspect of the process, which means they can adapt quickly and learn from their mistakes faster. It's like they're constantly tinkering and refining, pushing the boundaries with each launch.
That's a really different approach from how traditional space agencies like JXA operate.
Oh, absolutely. Government agencies often have to deal with a lot more bureaucracy and layers of oversight, and that can really slow things down. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, safety and reliability are super important in spaceflight, but it does mean that they might not be able to adapt and innovate as quickly as private companies like SpaceX, who've really embraced this fail fast, learn fast mentality.
And let's be honest, SpaceX has had its own share of explosions too. Remember that Falcon 9 rocket that went up in flames a few years back?
Oh, yeah, that was a dramatic one for sure. But the important thing is that they were able to analyze the data, figure out what went wrong, and then come back even stronger. That ability to learn from those failures has been crucial to their success.
So where does this leave Japan? With these recent setbacks, do they still have a chance to be a major player in the space industry?
It's a tough question. These failures have definitely shown some vulnerabilities, and the competition is only getting tougher. But I wouldn't count Japan out just yet. Remember, they have a long history of innovation and a very strong technological base. And even with these setbacks, Space One is still moving forward. They have this incredibly ambitious goal of launching 20 rockets every year by 2029.
Whoa, 20 launches a year. That's a huge jump from where they are now. Is that even realistic considering how things have been going?
It's bold for sure. To reach that goal, they'll need to make some major improvements to their technology and their processes. They're going to have to prove that they can consistently launch rockets reliably. It's a huge challenge, but it's also a chance for Japan to show the world what they can really do.
And I think this brings up an important point for our listeners. Why should they even care about a couple of failed rocket launches on the other side of the world? What's the bigger picture here?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. This isn't just about rockets and satellites. This is about the future of space exploration itself. We're seeing a huge shift happening. Private companies like SpaceX are starting to play a much bigger role. It's almost like the Wild West out there, with new players coming in, pushing the limits of what's possible. And as we explore further into space, the stakes get higher, the risks increase, and the need for innovation becomes even more important.
So these failures, while definitely disappointing, are also a reminder of how challenging space exploration really is. It's a wake-up call that success isn't guaranteed. And even the most advanced technology can fail.
Exactly. It really highlights the importance of persistence resilience and a willingness to adapt and change. It's a lesson that applies not just to space, but to anything you want to achieve in life.
Right.
We all face setbacks, but how we respond to those challenges ultimately determines our success.
You know, it's amazing to think how much the space industry has changed, even just in the last few years. It used to be all about like NASA and the European Space Agency leading the way. But now you've got these private companies like Space One jumping in with their own big plans and some pretty wild ideas.
It really is a fascinating time to be following space exploration. We're seeing a real shift happening with these private companies, bringing in a whole new energy and a willingness to, take risks maybe those traditional agencies weren't so comfortable with.
And speaking of risks, we have to talk about those back-to-back failures with that Kairos 2 rocket. I mean, it's got to be demoralizing for Space One, but I'm curious, what's the general feeling in the space community when something like this happens?
Well, I think there's always a sense of disappointment when a launch fails. Everyone knows just how much work, dedication, and brain power goes into these projects. But there's also this understanding that failure is a part of the process, especially when you're pushing the limits of technology like Space One is trying to do.
So it's not just about pointing fingers and saying, oh, they messed up.
Not at all. The space community is actually very collaborative. When something goes wrong, the focus is on understanding what happened, sharing what they learned, and using that to improve things for the future. It's all about progress, not blame.
That's really good to hear. Kind of speaks to a sense of shared purpose, even among competitors. But let's be real for a second. These failures have consequences, right? We talk about Space One's reputation, but what about the money? How do these setbacks affect their finances and Japan's space program as a whole?
Yeah, there's no easy way to say it. Each failure is a big financial hit. You've got the cost of the rocket itself, the payloads that were lost, and then the potential impact on future investments and contracts. It can be a tough road to come back from. But it's important to remember, space exploration has always been a long game. It takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to keep going, even when things get rough.
Okay, listener, let's wrap this up. We've covered a lot today, from the technical stuff about those Kairos failures to the bigger picture of what it means for Japan's space program. What's the main takeaway? What should we be thinking about as we watch this all unfold?
I think it boils down to a story of ambition setbacks and this constant drive for progress. Space One's failures show us that getting to space is never easy, and there will always be challenges along the way. But their determination to learn from their mistakes and keep pushing forward, that's really inspiring. It's a reminder that the human spirit of exploration is still alive and well. And I think that's something worth celebrating even when things don't go as planned.
That's a great point. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on Space One and the Japanese space program as they continue to reach for the stars. And for our listener, the next time you look up at the night sky, remember just how much work and ingenuity it takes to get even a tiny satellite up there. Until next time, keep exploring.